Good evening. My name is Paul Ellis. I'm a board member and I run the legal track for the New York Technology Council. On behalf of NYTEC, I'm pleased to welcome you all here to the session Legal Essentials for Startups. This is part 2 of 3, entitled Financing the Entity. I would briefly like to shout out our annual sponsors. I'm not going to read them all off, but we have a large and growing group of sponsors that have been important supporters of the work we do at NYTEC. I'd also like to note our partner organizations that we work with to put on our various programs. Finally, our media partners. And then, again, a special thanks to our host, Anchin, who's provided this great space for us this time and the last time, and they've really been very supportive of our efforts. So you are at a session of what we call our legal track. For those who are regulars, this is a series of events dedicated to informing entrepreneurs and principals of technology companies about important legal issues they need to know to grow and to operate and ultimately to sell their businesses. This is an informational and educational event, so I'll give my customary disclaimer. If you are seeking legal advice, we urge you to consult with your lawyer. Neither NYTEC nor any of us are here to provide you with legal advice. So this series is what we call our Legal Essentials series. The first 3 events are events focused on the things you need to know in the very beginning to start and to finance and operate your technology company. So the first session was held on October 25th on organizing the entity, what type of entity to form, where to form it, how to structure it, what issues come up among founders. This session today is on financing the entity, different alternatives for financing and how to structure the financing. And then on January 22nd, we have our 3rd session on intellectual property protection. Again, watch our website to register for that event. The panel this evening, there are 3 of us. The way we've done these events, one of us leads the presentation. Tonight that'll be me. And then the other 2, Frode Jensen and Jerry Spiegel, will be providing the color commentary, as it were, making additional comments, war stories, answering questions, and the like. The Q&A we will, by and large, try to keep to the end of the evening. If anyone has a burning question they'd like to get to now, you can certainly raise your hand, but we'd like to try to do all of that at the end. Okay? So with that, I'm going to give my co-panelists an opportunity just to introduce themselves. To my immediate left is Jerry Spiegel of Frankfurt, Kurnit. I will get to his slide. And to his left, we have Frode Jensen of Holland and Knight. If you guys want to take a minute or so to introduce yourselves and your practices.
Sure. I mean, ask a lawyer to introduce himself in front of a room of clients, potentially. Why not? So in any event, my name's Jerry Spiegel. I'm a partner at Frankfurt, Kurnit, Klein, and Selz. I started the technology practice there over 20 years ago. And we represent everything from small to medium stage media and technology companies, all of which use technology, and we also have a media-centric practice which deals with things like advertising and libel and all the kinds of things that companies today, every company today needs to be concerned about. So we've been a big supporter of NYTEC, and we hope those of you who are not members will join, and we hope to see you at future events.
Should I go, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Frode Jensen from Holland and Knight. I guess everything that you might want to know about Holland and Knight is on our enormous website, but we're a large American law firm with a handful of branches, offices abroad. We have 18 offices in the U.S. and over 1,000 lawyers, and we practice in just about every niche you can think of, including startups, technology, patents, and corporate matters relating to startups, patents, and technology. I think that says it all.
Okay. And lastly, just to tell you a bit about myself, again, my name is Paul Ellis. My law firm, Paul Ellis Law Group. We are a boutique firm that does a lot of work with small and mid-sized technology companies in areas including formation, angel, venture, and seed financing, intellectual property protection, employee matters, and mergers and acquisitions, or buying and selling companies. We all come out of big firms, so we have big firm training and expertise, but we practice in a small firm, providing more personal attention and a more flexible cost structure. And because of the amount of experience we have in the technology community, we can often be a source of referrals to service providers like accountants and bankers, as well as investors in the community. So with that, we will jump into our session this evening. So tonight we are talking about financing. So where we last left this topic, with Frode, we had taken ourselves through from the idea, through the formation of the company. We had our LLC, or our corporation, formed. We had it structured. We had our shareholders agreement. Everything was in place. Now the question is, where do we get the money to make this thing fly? I think the good news, as we all know these days, it takes less and less money to start a technology company, especially in the IT e-commerce space, which is good news. Nevertheless, it usually takes at least some money. And so the question is, what are your alternatives for raising that money, and how do we go about it? So this evening, we're going to start by talking about the financing strategy. What are the things you need to think about at the very beginning before you decide to go out and raise money or make it on your own? What are your alternatives to VC and angel financing? What are the costs and benefits? Then we'll talk about VCs and angels in particular, how they operate, what their motives are, benefits and costs of working with them. We're going to talk briefly about legal considerations in your business plan. We're going to talk about VCs in particular and what VCs tend to look for in an investment opportunity. Then we will talk about how you identify the VC and go about making the pitch. We'll talk about diligence once you're in a process with a VC, what information about the company the VC is going to be looking for. We're going to talk about the basics of the term sheet, and then how much you should raise, and that fits into the question of valuation. Finally, we get to the big topic of what type of investment structure or instrument you should use. Now, at this point, we are going to touch briefly on, in this session, on the different types of instruments and basically how they operate, what the costs and benefits are of working with the different instruments, to go into a deep conversation about how they get structured, how they get negotiated, is beyond what we can do in this session. In a subsequent session, we spend an entire evening talking about how you structure and negotiate one of these financings, and so that'll be coming up in a future segment. But we will touch on them briefly, and then we'll finish with securities laws, a perennial favorite topic of lawyers, and tell you how to stay out of trouble with the Fed. Okay, so what we will not cover today, we're not going to talk about joint venture structures, which is often a way that financing gets done for an early stage company or concept. We're not really going to talk about corporate or strategic investments. It can be an important part of early stage financing, but it goes beyond what we can cover today. And then, although a lot of what we're talking about is relevant to LLCs, when it comes to particular structuring issues, we're really going to focus on corporations because, as we know from the last session, when a VC gets into the mix, in most situations they're going to want to invest into a corporation. So we're going to be focusing on investments into corporations, although I will tell you that virtually everything that you can do in terms of structuring an investment in a corporation, you can also do for an LLC, although the tax consequences may be different. But we will not be getting into that, at least not tonight. Okay, so starting point is your financing strategy. What we're talking about here is, at the moment that you're ready to start building out your company, what are the things you need to think about? in terms of where the money is going to come from. Because you have a number of choices, right? You can bootstrap, you can go to your friends and family, you can go to angels, you can go to VCs, and you may use all of those in various, at various points, but you may decide to stay just bootstrap and try to make it as far as you can on your own, or you may go for angel money very early on. So you have some choices to make right in the beginning, and it's important to think about what the consequences of those choices are before you start down the road. So first off, you need to think about what the objectives are in your company. That is to say, are you looking for a long-term ownership in your company? Do you want to start a company that you're going to be running for many years? Or are you okay with the idea that you may grow it quickly, but then have to make an exit? Now, that may be an exit you want to make, but if you bring in a VC and maybe an angel, you may be forced into an exit. So that's something you need to think about right in the beginning, because that's an important sort of fork in the road in terms of how you finance your company. Other considerations are timing. If you are in an industry where things are moving quickly and there's a first mover advantage, you may have no choice but to go out for angel or VC money as quickly as you can, because if you don't move quickly, someone else is going to take advantage of that opportunity, and then you'll be number 2 or number 3. You want to be the Amazon. You don't want to be the company that no one has ever heard of. The other consideration in terms of timing is patience of founders for a slow and potentially cash-poor ramp-up. Although you will not be well paid necessarily if you bring in VC money, you're likely to be better paid if you're VC financed than if you're doing it on your own. So it's really a matter of how long you can afford to get by on your savings and maybe the income of your spouse or however else you make your way. Another consideration, amount of funding needed to achieve objectives. As a practical matter, for some businesses you have no choice. If you're in the life sciences space or a pharma company, the amount of money that needs to be raised for certain types of, in certain industries, leaves you no alternative but to go for VC financing. I suspect a lot of people in this room are in the IT, e-commerce, new media space. The cash demands tend to be lower with what you do. That gives you a little bit more freedom. Tolerance and need for guidance and control. If you bring in investors, they are going to want to know what you're doing, and they're going to keep your feet to the fire. Maybe that's a good thing if it keeps you moving, but it may be a bad thing. Maybe you really have to do it your way, and you just don't take well to people meddling with your business. So in that case, maybe you don't want outside financing. Need for contact into industry. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but a VC can be a big source of contacts. And finally, your interest in pursuing objectives beyond a significant exit. If you're interested in pure R&D, or if you're interested in social objectives, or any number of things that are only tangentially at best related to making money for your investors, better not to bring in investors in the first place, because they're not likely to have a lot of tolerance for those other objectives.
Can I just, let me, just a couple of observations, and again, from doing this over many years, I think it's important to keep in mind that you have to be realistic about your financing opportunities. In other words, you're not going to put together a business plan and go talk to the top VC in that space and expect to get funded. So there's usually a sequence of funding that happens in most companies, and starting with the founders putting in some money and sweat, or either or both, and then maybe looking at friends and family, and then looking at angels, and then looking at VCs. So while we talk about all these things as a whole, there also is, generally speaking, and not necessarily always, but certainly frequently, a sequence to those events, and you should be realistic about what your expectations are in terms of the level of funding that you want to go after.
Paul, I would add that I think it's important to be realistic about one's own skill sets. And to the extent that the idea revolves around a product that has potential scale, it may be necessary to get money to reach that scale. And then it's highly likely, once you've reached scale, that there are other skill sets that the entrepreneur doesn't necessarily bring to the table, including managing a large company. And I think entrepreneurs increasingly are realistic about the different skill sets that are necessary at the invention and development stage, and then the skill sets that are required down the road. And I think it's also important not to be too romantic about long-term ownership, which is maybe a kind of American goal and an American virtue. But in technology companies, the idea is to grow the technology as fast as possible. And in all likelihood, if you don't grow it fast, it won't survive. And then over time, it's going to be superseded too.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, to some extent, sometimes it's not just a matter of if, but when. And I think we all have this conversation with our clients and talk about not only are you going to seek financing, but when do you bring it in? And we'll talk about this more as we go further. If you bootstrap yourself a certain amount, increase the value of your company, it means your valuation is better when it comes time for financing and you give away less to the company. And to go to Jerry's point, yes, it's absolutely right. There's a sequence of financing that one often goes through. I think what we're talking about here is sort of the fork in the road. You know, do you seek financing now or do you continue to bootstrap? Because once you start down that path of financing, you are committing to a certain extent to an exit and to having board members and the like. So, all right, so let's talk for a few minutes about what the alternatives are to VC and angel financing. And again, as Frode and Jerry bring up, to some extent, it isn't an either or, but it is a matter of when. And these are strategies that you can incorporate along the way to get as far as you can before you have to bring in outside financing. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but sweat equity, sort of the fundamental, how much of your own time and effort you put in on the come, in order to build your company up, which shades into compensation alternatives, deferred compensation, and this can be applied to the founder as well as to employees, reduced compensation, or equity compensation, options, and equity incentive plans. Personal savings, credit cards, home equity loans, so basically tapping all the different sources of cash you have available to you. Some of these are self-evident on this and the next slide. Some of them are things that people don't necessarily think about and are worth considering. Alternative funding sources, day job. You work by day and you build your company by night. Consulting, or hybrid business models. I think that's one worth pausing on. I've had a few clients over the years. In fact, one of them is in the room now, who is having a hybrid business model where, on the one hand, building out a project for one particular client, which brings in some revenue, while at the same time building out a product that's going to scale more broadly across the industry. And so with a hybrid model, that can be a way to provide some additional cash while you build out your ultimate business. And sometimes the work that you do on one side of the business to bring in the cash can inform and help you to get further with the other side. So that's something we're thinking about. Creative equipment procurement, used, borrowed, shared. I mean, off-site hosting is, I guess, the extreme of that. Creative facilities, there's so many opportunities now with incubators, General Assembly and Sunshine Suites. I mean, there are all sorts of things around town. Careful management of working capital. Basically, collect fast and take advantage of your full payment terms. If it's net 30 to pay your vendors, then don't pay after 15 days. Those things can make a difference. Careful management of your inventory, if that's relevant. Government tax incentives. This is a really important one and one that often gets ignored. And I often say to my clients, it's very important that they're working with an accountant who knows what government tax incentives are available and can help them to take advantage of them. I've had clients who ignored that advice and after 2 or 3 years finally found their way to an accountant who knew that space, and they were able to recover hundreds of thousands of dollars that they had left on the table at a point when they could have really used it. Government advances or prepayments, customer advances, prepayments. If you have a product or a technology that someone out there really wants to buy, and they know that you're the source for it, sometimes they will prepay in order to help you to get to market. They may want something for it, which is fine. Maybe they want better pricing or whatever it is, but that can also be a way to finance the company. And then finally, there are all sorts of government grant and loan programs, SBIR, EDC, and ESD and the like. Anything to add?
Yeah, just to comment on two of the things you said. Just first on the grant programs, there are certain industries that lend themselves more so to that type of work. I've had clients in the alternative energy space, for example, where there are lots of grants that are available that can be utilized to help them in their early stages. The other comment I wanted to make is the alternative, the hybrid business model that Paul just mentioned. I've had a number of instances where clients have pitched to their customers the development of a product on very attractive terms which included their having the right to take the product and then exploit it in other markets. So that's just another way of doing that, possibly.
I'd like to just observe that the reason Paul has such a long list of bootstrapping alternatives, and the reason that we're going to come back to this issue over and over again this evening is that your company, and you haven't been an entrepreneur for more than about a day before you realize that the valuation of your company is lowest on the day that you think of the idea. And the more you can defer taking someone else's money by utilizing any one or a combination of these techniques, the higher the valuation, which means you have to sell less of the company to a third party if you do decide to take venture outside money. So it's absolutely in the entrepreneur's best interest, and it's natural to try to finance a company for as long as possible without taking someone else's money.
All right. Continuing with alternatives, then there are alternative sources of equity and debt financing. These are ways to bring in debt and equity financing beyond angels and VCs. The obvious one is friends and family and co-founders, and to some extent those friends and family can shade into angel financing at some level. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That can be investments or it can be loans. Supplier or vendor financing. We talked about prepayments, but sometimes your suppliers or vendors will assist you in the financing in terms of making loans, or they may even take an equity position, which shades over into strategic partnerships and alliances, which can be a valuable source of financing if properly structured. One needs to be careful in that, because if you have a strategic partner or a big strategic player in the industry who is an equity holder in your company, you need to make sure you know what they are and are not getting for that, because they obviously have an interest in you beyond simply financial. And then small business loans, microfinancing. It can be difficult as a small startup business, but you might be able to get a line of $50,000 or $100,000 from your local bank, which can make a difference. Then crowdfunding. It's funny, when I put these slides together, I wasn't sure where to put crowdfunding, whether it belonged on the previous slide, which is where the way we do crowdfunding now, like Kickstarter, it can be a source of money, but it's not a way that you can give equity, or the way we hope to see it, in some months from now after the SEC has released its regs, where you can actually do equity crowdfunding. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but as people know from the Jobs Act passed earlier this year, we will have the potential of a new source of financing that's in the months to come, hopefully known as crowdfunding. So potential cost of alternative strategies. I think Frode outlined the benefits. Benefits are you increase the value of your company and you ultimately give away less if the day comes when you do take in equity financing. But there are costs, and we addressed slower growth may result in a missed opportunity. As we said, certain types of investments simply require, certain types of businesses simply require significant investment. Cash shortages may keep you focused on surviving rather than thriving. If you're trying to figure out how to make the next rent payment, it may be a little bit difficult to focus on really blowing out your company. Poorly structured relationships with customers, vendors, and partners can hinder growth. So all these things we talked about in terms of prepayments, vendor prepayments and financing, if that's not done right, it can create problems. And ultimately, the business may fail if you don't have enough money to keep it going. And at that point, given that you're the one that's put all the money into the business, you have the most to lose. So there are certainly significant downsides to bootstrapping. Do you guys anything to add? Or?
I would just quickly point out in one area, co-founder investments that Paul touched on. Co-founder investments can be very tricky, and what we're driving at here is one founder brings one set of assets to the table, and another founder brings another. And you can all think of examples of this, but one of the founders happens to have a bank account, and the other founder has an idea. Well, how do you allocate equity between those two different asset classes? And it can be very difficult. But we're not going to spend much more time on it than that.
Yeah, I'd like to just mention the strategic partnership issue. I actually am working on a situation right now that makes that makes me very focused on it. You have to be very careful when you cut strategic relationships with people who are essentially your customers, because it can have an adverse impact on your ability to do business with other people who are competitors. And to the extent that you enter into any kind of financing arrangement with a strategic partner, strategic investor, it can also have an adverse impact on your ultimate ability to profit on an exit. So it's something to think about in terms, the money is always attractive, but you have to think about the negatives that can bring along with it, and I've seen those in action, so they're very real.
All right. Moving on, understanding the players, angels. Now, we'll talk about VCs in a minute, but unlike VCs, when we talk about angel investors, we're really talking about a very broad group of players with often sort of mixed and very divergent motives. It is not a cohesive group. VCs are motivated pretty clearly by a fundamental set of guidelines. Generally, angels make smaller investments than VCs, but not always. The world of early stage investing is changing as angels start to make larger investments, especially with so-called super angels. And then you have VCs making smaller investments. So, you now have angel groups that'll make, $1 million investments, and VCs that'll make $250,000 investments. So that world is changing to some extent. But generally speaking, angels are going to make smaller investments than VCs. Angels may or may not have industry expertise. So we can be talking about people that have successful entrepreneurs that are looking for new opportunities and looking to bring work with young companies and help them with money and contacts and ideas and expertise. Or we can be talking about a family office that's simply looking for a way to diversify their investment portfolio, but has no particular expertise in the industry, or executives who are just trying to look for a way to deploy cash. So there are all sorts of people that fall into this category of angel investors. Motivations can vary broadly. On the one hand, as I said, you have the people that want to work with small companies and assist companies. There are others that are just looking for a different way to invest their funds. And similarly, angels operate in many different ways. You have highly disciplined networks, such as New York Angels or Jumpstart in New Jersey. Then you have loose affiliations, a bunch of people that may just get together once or twice a month to consider opportunities, or people that simply function on their own. In terms of distinguishing them from founders and friends and family, friends and family, those are people that you know. Angels generally are third parties, but at some level, friends shade into angels. So if you have the right kind of friends, they can end up being angel investors, and they will structure an investment with just as much discipline as an angel investor, a third party, or an unknown angel might. But there is, to some extent, a continuum there between friends and family, angel investors, or at least there can be. The strengths of working with angels, they can offer significant funding on reasonable terms earlier than many VCs. So that is to say, generally speaking, not only will they invest smaller rounds, but they will come in earlier than many VCs will come in. And their terms can be more reasonable because, unlike VCs that have pretty strict criteria for their investment and for their exit, their metrics on an exit, an angel is motivated by many different things. Most of them do want to make money, but some of them are motivated by just working with young entrepreneurs, and they may not need to get an exit within 5 to 7 years like a VC. They may be able to wait longer, or they may not really care how long it takes, as long as you're moving in the right direction. So the terms can be a lot more flexible with angels. They can offer useful guidance and contacts. It depends on who they are. And as I said, they can be less demanding on exit timing. Limitations: not generally a source of further funding. That's an important one. When you get a VC in the mix, good chance they'll be there for a follow-on round of funding and at least help to organize a syndicate for a follow-on round. An angel, you cannot count on them being there for the future. Less sophisticated angels can expect terms that are overreaching. This can be a problem. Angels that don't really know what they're doing can ask for things like, undiluting equity interests, or a board seat that they never have to give up no matter how small their position is, or things that may really cause a problem when you try to bring in a VC down the line and then the VC says, oh, we can't agree to this. The investment process can be uncertain because they're doing this in their spare time and they have day jobs. It may take a while to actually get them to say yes or get them to say no. And investor relations can be time-consuming because many angels are not professional investors and are not necessarily savvy about the world of early-stage financing. You can spend a lot of time trying to explain to them what's going on and how you're doing and why, gosh, it's 6 months later and you haven't given them a big exit, and so on and so forth.
I think that was good. Just a couple of thoughts. You really should know who your investor is if you're dealing with a small group. It's important to make sure that you're on the same page as they are, or at least you believe that they're on the same page as you are, because they can create just as much disruption as any investor in a boardroom. And dealing with networks of angels, and I've done over the years deals with a number of different groups like that, the dynamics of which can be very challenging. In fact, I've seen many clients spend much more time having to manage their angel investors than they've had to manage their VC investors. So while they're at a lower level, at some level they can actually take more time to manage, and also to be sure that they are on the same page. The other issue is finding an angel who's got expertise in the area that you're focused on, and that can be a tremendous advantage and it can be a tremendous problem. And again, it's a matter of knowing who you're dealing with and making sure that you're looking at the same target, and that the person that you're dealing with is someone that you feel comfortable with, can be a partner on a longer term basis, because if that blows up, all the effort you've put in can really end up being for naught.
I agree, Jerry. I think there's a lot of excitement in New York about the developing interest in technology in New York City, and there are graduates of universities coming out with the idea of starting companies, or faculty members that are interested in starting companies. And if you look at the statistics, there is an increasing amount of angel money and venture money, and some of the statistics even show that the rate of growth in investment in New York is larger than, for example, Boston, and creeping up on Silicon Valley. But the thing that Silicon Valley has, and I think this goes to your point, is that there is a highly developed community of angels, a lot of people who've been through numerous deals, who've seen how ideas turn out, who understand the various stages of development. And I think the sophistication of the angel community as it develops here is going to be increasingly important in finding a kind of a coherent segment that helps develop technology companies at the early stage. Having an angel that is experienced in the industry is terrific, and having an angel who's not a jerk because he's been through a few rounds, a few companies, is also a great thing. And I think this will come as our community develops.
All right, so moving on. I should say we have the slide deck that you will see and that you'll receive. It has more slides in it than we're actually going to go over today. We wanted to give you a more extensive deck, but there's some things we're going to give short shrift to, but when you receive it, you'll be able to go over them in a little more detail. One of them is, and now I've skipped past it. There we go, venture capitalists. What is a VC fund? Very quickly, for those who don't understand, a VC fund is simply, it's a pooled investment vehicle. It raises money from institutional investors, high net worth individuals, family offices. It's professionally managed, and the managers generally invest some of their own money into the fund, but most of the money is coming from outside investors. And that's an important thing to recognize, because to some extent that limits the flexibility of a VC fund compared to an angel. An angel is investing their own money. They can do whatever they want, make their own choices. The manager of a VC fund doesn't have that same flexibility. They receive a percentage of the profits, generally 20%, plus a 2% management fee. They invest in often high-risk portfolio companies. That would be you. Another important point to recognize is that VC funds generally have a life cycle, usually 10 years. And that means there's a 10-year period from the time the fund is raised and closed, during which time they have to identify the portfolio companies, make the investments, help the companies to grow, make an exit, and pay off the money to their investors. So that means that their life cycle for the investment in you, the company, is more like 5 to 7 years. Sometimes extensions are possible, but it's an important thing to be aware of, because that creates that sort of timing pressure to get to an exit. And they often have a particular focus with respect to industry sector, investment size, and financing stage. You guys have anything, or we move on? Benefits of VC financing. We've touched on this a little bit. It can be fast. It can allow you to focus on your core objectives as opposed to raising money or surviving. It can be available in large amounts. Something we haven't talked about, it can lend increased credibility to prospective customers, partners, key employees. When you have a name brand VC behind you, that is something that's important to the community generally. And VCs can add significant value beyond the initial funding. So that is to say, beyond the money that they're giving you, The individuals can be a source of strategic advice, whether you want it or not. They can help you to keep a focus on business objectives, again, whether you want it or not. I mean, generally speaking, it's a good thing. You know, if you yourself are looking for a big exit, it's helpful to have someone there at the table who's been down that path many, many times and who's seen successes and seen failures. For some of you, maybe this is your first company, so you really should take the benefit of the experience that a VC can bring. Contacts, very important. Partners, customers, advisors, portfolio companies. The VC can help with all of this, and additional funding, as we discussed. Finally, when it comes to an exit, your interests in the VCs are hopefully quite well aligned at that point, and they will be very motivated to help you find your way to a good exit, a good sale of your company, or even better, an IPO if that great day comes.
Paul, increasingly there are venture consultants who provide some of these services without taking 40% of your company for X dollars. And you may run into a venture consultant, somebody who promises or offers to advise you about the development of your company, and can deliver some of the advice that is listed here in the bullets without an equity investment. And I think there's also another subcategory of venture funds that are maybe less interested in advising and more interested in cold investing. And you may get a better price from those guys because they don't have to spend as much time with you.
All right. Disadvantages can be expensive in terms of valuation and dilution. We talked about the fact that angels may have more flexibility in terms of the terms they offer you. VCs are going to be less flexible as far as the terms. They are extremely focused on valuation. They're extremely focused on their internal rate of return, how much money they may be able to make from their investment in you at the end of the day. Many VCs will not invest in smaller early rounds, although that's changing. We talked about the fact that the fund structure demands an exit at a certain rate of return within a fixed time frame. Well, rate of return we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of valuation. Shared control. They will get a board seat in all likelihood, although that's, if it's a smaller, there are some funds that are doing smaller rounds. They don't necessarily take a board seat, but often they'll want a board seat. They'll have veto rights over important decisions. So you face the risk of finding yourself shut out of strategic decision making, and at the extreme, as a CEO, potentially getting replaced down the line with someone who's more experienced. Again, not necessarily the worst thing. I think it's important as an entrepreneur to understand where your strengths are. Your strengths may be developing a great product. It may not be bringing a company to building a $100 million company. So sometimes it's not such a bad thing. We talked about the fund structure limiting other objectives. It is time consuming to close any type of investment, whether it's angel or VC. And the transaction costs, that is to say legal costs, can be significant. So bottom line, it can be very valuable, but it's important to make sure that interests and objectives are aligned.
Okay, again, just from my experience, very important to make sure that the individuals that you're dealing with at the VC are the people that you're simpatico with and who understand you and what you're driving at, and you understand their goals as well. Again, that personal relationship is very important because a lot of decisions get made in that boardroom, and you want to make sure that you've got a common sense of purpose there with your investor. And remember, what I like to tell my clients is, remember one thing. Most VCs have never run a company. Most VCs are finance people. They may have people that have run companies that are helping them, but most of them haven't. And you're out there running your company, and you have to believe in what you're doing, and while you want to take the advice of your VC to heart, believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing.
Okay, so the business plan. We're really just briefly the legal considerations in the business plan. As people probably know, it's becoming less important to have a business plan now than it used to be. A lot of financing is just done on a deck and an executive summary. There can be value to the business plan for your own purposes in terms of the development and growth of the business. It can be a sales and disclosure document for investors. The elements are set forth here. In terms of the legal considerations, it should have appropriate legends. If it is, in fact, incorporated into the PPM, which will often happen, should be numbered and recipients recorded. If you're using your business plan as part of a PPM, there's no particular disclosure required. However, it does need to be correct and accurate, free of misstatements, and should include a risk factors section. Private placement memorandum. That's, again, less used now, certainly for smaller deals than in the past, but a disclosure document used to sell the deal and to provide protection in terms of the securities laws. Shall we continue?
Well, my only comment about business plans is that as lawyers, what we find ourselves oftentimes doing is editing your business plan to take out all those wishful, hopeful, positive statements and, ameliorating them so that we're a little more comfortable that they're not making promises that you shouldn't be making.
Indeed, yes. We're the ones that tell you all the rosy things that you can't say or we would advise you not say. So what are VCs looking for when they are evaluating your company? There are a number of things they look at. None of them is determinative, but these are the sorts of things that are on the list of most VCs. They're looking for a large and growing market. So they want to know that if you are in fact successful, you're successful in a market where you can really make something happen. A proven management team. For many VCs, this is the most important factor because they know that things happen, things go wrong, and things don't work out the way you planned. But they know that a good management team can pivot and turn something around and find a new strategy. So having a killer management team is very important to VCs. A protected or protectable, preferably disruptive product and technology. That goes to a couple of things. Protected actually relates to the following point, barriers to entry, to know that in the event that you are successful, you can own that space to some extent, that someone can't come in after you with a copycat company, simply do the same thing, and so they won't get the benefit of their investment. But disruptive, everyone talks about disruptive technology. If that's what I guess all VCs are looking for in a sense, or they'd like to find, to disrupt an existing industry and really to take advantage of a huge opportunity. And finally, market acceptance. This can play out a number of ways. Revenues are important. Time was that VCs weren't so necessarily concerned that your company have revenues, but as it's getting less expensive to start a company, revenues becomes an important factor for VCs as a indication that you in fact have got something going. But some level of market acceptance. People are buying your product, people are interested in buying your product, you have important strategic partners, something beyond your say-so that tells a VC that what you have is something people will be interested in. Remember, and this is an important thing for technologists, people tend to focus on the technology, that your company is being evaluated as an investment opportunity. Make sure you show the investors how they're going to make money. That's what they want to see. And that goes to the next point. Again, you need to show them the technology. They want to see how it works, and if it's something that's sort of interesting and has some buzz or pizzazz. I mean, that's always good. People like, VCs are people. If you have some fun, cool technology, make sure you show it off, because that certainly gets people's interest. But the important point is, whatever the technology is, don't get lost in it. As technologists, that's where you're comfortable. That's what you know. But the VCs want to see much more than the technology. They want to know that you understand your industry. They want to know that you've incorporated that technology into a product that is going to answer something, a pain point in the industry. And they're going to want to see that you have a great marketing strategy. It doesn't help if you have a great product. You need to know how to sell it into the industry to be successful. So, all of those are important things. They'll figure that you've got the technology right. You need to show them you got the other stuff going as well.
I would just emphasize that point about the people. Investors, VCs have, every single one of them has told me the same thing. They don't invest in technologies or businesses, they invest in people. Of course, they're investing in your business, but they're really investing in you. And I think that what they want to see is someone who can react to anything that can come down the road and deal with it and address it. If you are so focused on one aspect of your business and thinking it's going to be successful, that may be telegraphing the wrong idea. Business is a dynamic activity, and I'll bet that every single one of us has had many clients who started a business to do X and ended up doing Y. And if they didn't know how to pivot from X to Y, they wouldn't still be in business. So being able to pivot I think it's a skill that's essential in any entrepreneur, and I think every VC and an investor wants to see that in you, that you have the ability to do that.
But I would go back to a point, Jerry, you made earlier, which is there are multiple stages, and if you're an early stage entrepreneur here and you're listening to us and you're thinking, well, gee, I don't have a proven management team yet because it's just me, and I haven't been able to establish to a VC that there's a $100 million market for my product, and I don't even have early revenues. There are investors for every stage. So a growth investor, a VC who's really focused on growth, is going to take a company with maybe 10 million of sales and try to help them get to 100 million. And that's a different kind of investment, requires a different kind of management team. There's also an angel who's going to take a look at a good technology that looks like it can be turned into a good product that has a market, and work with one or two founders to help them invent that company. So the takeaway isn't that you have to have all of these things at the first stage. The takeaway is that you have to be thinking about all of these things to get to your goal line.
All right. So how do you find these VCs? We've talked about the fact they have a particular focus. It's important that you know who you're approaching. So, as we say here, don't go to a VC focused on green tech with a social networking play. Know what they're investing in and make sure that you're going to the right people. There are all sorts of resources out there to educate yourselves, online listings, VC websites, the list is here. Bottom line is, however you do it, by going to their websites. I mean, you can learn so much about what a VC is looking for just by going to their website and looking through what they have there. Also, VC attorneys, accountants can be a good source as well. In terms of making the connection, what's important, the best way to make a connection is through some type of introduction, through a personal referral. It can be an attorney or an accountant. Maybe someone that works at a VC, one of that VC's portfolio companies, mutual acquaintances. Those are really the best ways to make the connection to the VC. Venture fairs are a way to connect with the VCs, not as valuable as having some type of referral, because VCs get so many emails and opportunities and people they meet, they need some type of filtering mechanism. If you come to them through someone they know and trust, that's going to elevate you in their eyes. As I say, the least likely path to success, an unsolicited email query is highly unlikely to result in an investment. We'll just spend a minute on this. The elevator pitch, we put this in here because it has value not just for the elevator pitch, that minute that you get with the VC in the elevator, but to think about how you present your company. Each of you should be able, in a minute or 2 minutes, to be able to talk about what is the key things about your company that an investor wants to hear. That's an important exercise, regardless of whether you ever have the opportunity to use it in an elevator. I list the things that are important here. With respect to the other considerations, as I say, front load the best stuff. And what I mean by that is, in these 8 factors, as Frode mentioned, no one's going to have everything going on. If you've got it all happening here, I don't know, you're Mark Zuckerberg or your Google or whatever it is. Everyone's going to have some things they've got going for them and some things they don't. Recognize what those things are that are going to be most interesting to an investor, and make sure you push that, whether it's in your elevator pitch, in your deck, in your executive summary, whatever it is. So, for example, if point 7, relationships, if you have advisors from the big industry heavyweights on your advisory board, push point 7 up to point 1 or point 2 and tell people that, because that's going to get the interest of an investor. Or management team. If you've had 3 successful $100 million exits, that's the first thing you should be telling people, because that's what's going to get them focused. So make sure you go with your best stuff first. Passion is critical. They want to know that you're driven. They're trusting you with a lot of money and hoping that you're going to make them a lot of money. So they want to know that you're really prepared to go the distance. And we touched on point 3. Explain the technology, but don't focus on it. And lastly, make sure you get to a next step. If you actually get that moment with the investor, get something out of it. A business card, an appointment for a phone call, a meeting, something. Okay, so now we have gotten to, you've identified the investor, you've made the connection, they're interested, we get to due diligence. This is the moment where the investor starts to take a deeper look at the company. You've already gotten their interest. They've heard your elevator pitch, they want to know more, maybe they've seen your slide deck. Now they're going to take a deeper dive. Starts with the business. They're going to want to know about your product, they're going to look at your financials, they're going to want to talk to your customers if you have them. They're going to want to know all about the business, the management team, so on and so forth. Then we get to legal diligence. Given that this is a legal event, we focus on the legal aspects. Corporate records, financial records, agreements. They're going to want to look at all of your legal affairs. Intellectual property records, very important. I've had at least a couple of deals founder on IP, because often that is the most important thing that the company has. And when they get the IP lawyers involved, the patent attorneys or whatever it is, to see what you've got, to make sure it's protected, to see what it's worth, they find out there are problems there. Bottom line on all of this is you should have it all in order beforehand. As you grow your company, ideally you're working to keep your records in order, to make sure you're working with your IP lawyer, your IP is protected, whatever it is. So when the diligence moment comes along, everything is in order and the investors like what they see. Protect your critical assets. Frode and I the 3 of us were talking about this the other day. Given that VCs especially are not prepared to generally sign NDAs, how do you protect your intellectual property? Well, we were distinguishing between VCs and angels. When it comes to VCs, yes, you probably won't get an NDA signed. When it comes to an angel, that's a very different story, and you need to be a little bit more focused on who you're talking to and what your risk is. VCs have a reputation in the marketplace that they need to protect. Angels, as we've said, are a very broad group of investors, and so you may be better advised to make sure you have an NDA signed when you're talking to an angel. Of course, it's different if it's just some guy you met at an event on the one hand, or New York Angels on the other hand. There's a world of difference between those two extremes. But regardless of whether you have an NDA signed, as I always tell people, the most useful way to keep something a secret is not tell anyone. So whatever is your secret sauce, your critical assets, don't spill them at the beginning of the process. Diligence is a phased process. You give people information as they need it along the way. So there are certain things that you may not really reveal till the very end, till you know that they're going to make an investment, and it may be under very controlled circumstances.
Just one comment on the whole trade secret issue, which is there are oftentimes things that are so critical, so important to your business that you would consider them to be a trade secret. And it's important to remember that no matter who you're talking to, no matter how important they may be to you, and no matter how much you want their money, you can't disclose a trade secret to them without an NDA, without losing the trade secret protection. So it's, again, one of those things you need to work on closely with your lawyer. So just keep that in mind.
So now we get to the term sheet. Not usually legally binding, except for certain provisions. You do want a term sheet. Whether it's a VC will almost always be working with a term sheet. An angel investor may or may not. You should have it. It helps to get everyone on the same page and make sure it's clear what the terms are. It makes it more efficient in terms of drafting the agreements, increases clarity, avoids misunderstanding. Be aware that even if it is not binding, it is still going to have some moral weight in the negotiations. I've had this come up with clients before. I tell them, don't sign anything until I see it. Next thing I know, they send me a signed term sheet, and I go, oh, okay, so now you look at it. They say, oh, but it's not binding, it's not binding. I say, okay, we'll see. And I look through it and I say, well, you probably shouldn't have agreed to this, and you probably shouldn't have agreed to that. And they say, oh, it's okay, we'll be able to get it back when we get to drafting. And I mean, this happened to me just a few weeks ago. We get onto the conference call, and I say, okay, so Joe, I've been talking with my client. We need to work over this one or two points here. And they say, Paul, I'm looking at a term sheet here, and that's what was agreed to, and that's the deal. So it was not a binding term sheet, but once it was signed and agreed to, boy, it can be really difficult to claw back from it. So you need to keep that in mind. First draft, generally presented by the investor, but that can go both ways, especially with angel investors.
Changing your mind is called retrading in our world, and it's a bad thing.
Yes, yes.
And I would just emphasize the importance of using term sheets. I mean, I actually use them in so many parts of my practice for any deal because it just makes the whole process much, it streamlines the whole process and enables you to manage and control it. So even if your investor doesn't want a term sheet, I think you do.
Yeah, I mean, as a practical matter, it helps to manage your legal fees as well. It's always easier to be negotiating off a term sheet than every once in a while someone will say, oh, let's skip the term sheet, let's go right to documents. Never a good idea. Never a good idea. Even, it doesn't have to be a complicated term sheet. Just one page bullet point list makes a big difference. Okay, how much are we raising? Well, rule number one, don't run out of cash. You can get over all sorts of problems in your company, but if you run out of cash, it's game over. How much do you raise? Well, more than you think you'll need, and then add a little bit more. because everything takes longer than expected. Everything is more expensive than expected. So however long you think it's going to take to get to the next stage of development, it's likely to take longer than that still. And you don't want to be in a position where you're running out of money at a point where you're negotiating your next round of financing, because whatever leverage you have, and it generally isn't much, goes out the window at that point. So you want to, if you think you need 6 months to get to the next stage, make sure you've got 9 months or 12 months of cash. I mean, whatever it is, just don't cut it too close. Staged financing, this is an important concept, and Frode spoke about it before. Actually, I'm going to flip to the next slide. You need to think about financing as either a series of financings in the life cycle of your company. So up here we see, first you have an idea, then you organize your company, you go to the prototype, you start to sell your first revenues, then you start to scale, and then you exit. I mean, these are some of the moments, in the life cycle of a company. It may be that you're raising money at several points along that continuum, okay? And ideally, if you need significant amounts of money, you should be raising money at various points along that continuum, because as you get to every stage, the value of your company increases. Therefore, it costs less in terms of your equity in order to bring in the same amount of investment. So take an example. Let's suppose you're going to need $2 million to get your company to the revenue stage. If you bring, at the early stage, an investor may only value your company at $2 million. So to bring in another $2 million, you basically have to give away half of your company. So you've given away 50% of your company to raise $2 million. On the other hand, if at that stage, when your company's worth $2 million, you bring in only $1 million, at that point, you give away a third of your company at that point to raise the first $1 million. And then you go a little bit further down the line. At this point, your company maybe is now worth $4 million. You bring in another $1 million, you give away 20%. See, at every stage along the way, as the value of the company increases, the amount of equity you have to give away to bring in the same amount of money decreases. So it's important to do your financing in stages. And we say you fund to the next milestone. So if you think to get from startup to prototype is going to cost you, about $500,000 or $750,000, raise $1 million. Don't raise $2 million. Raise what you need and a little bit more to get yourself to the next stage. Because by the time you get to the next stage, the value of your company will have increased from $2 million to $4 million. That's when you raise another $1 million. So if you do staged financings, at the end of the day, you'll end up owning more of your company. However, there is a trade-off in staged financings, because that assumes that at every step of the way, that money will be available to you. It may be, you took $1 million, you figure you'll take another $1 million in a year from now, and the economy tanks, and then that money is not available to you. And the company fails for lack of that second $1 million. So there is a trade-off here, and it's one you really need to think about in terms of how you do this. I've seen it go both ways with companies. I had one client that was going like gangbusters, 06, 07, 08, raising enough money as they went, and then the economy tanked, they couldn't raise any more money, and the company tanked. If they had taken more money earlier, they'd be in business today. So it's you don't want to cut it too close.
Yeah, absolutely. In biotech, which is an area that I've been involved in, biotech financing windows open and shut, and VC firms disappear and grow, and then all of a sudden have bad returns and disappear, and the window's closed, and you can't raise anything for the next round. And if you haven't raised enough capital in an earlier round, and you're in a competitive process to get a compound through FDA and get it to market, you're in big trouble. And companies fail at that point and can't be resuscitated because they lose the competitive advantage. So this is easier said than done, right, Paul? It's a real dance.
It's a real balance. And last point here is sometimes investors will want to link funding to interim targets. So, I'll give you $2 million, but I'll give you 500 when you hit this milestone, or 500 when you hit that, and 500. That's something you should really avoid because it's for their benefit. It doesn't give you any benefit. It's basically a way of them, holding back their money but not giving you any increase in valuation along the way.
If you're funding to the next milestone and you need to pivot, hasn't your milestone totally changed and messed you up? Or maybe that's the point you're making about interim targets. I'm not sure. You're funding until you get to this state, but you're not going to go there at all because you pivoted to something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, there are all sorts of issues that can be at play. Because at that point, if you have an investor on the board, they're going to be part of the conversation about, well, gee, things aren't going the way we thought. Maybe we need to go in this direction. That can be a difficult moment because now you're off your whatever you thought you were building to. You're not building. You're building to something else. You may need additional funds. It may involve a down round. I mean, there are a number of, in a sense, all bets are off at that point. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
No, I would agree with that. But I actually wanted to talk about that issue that you just mentioned, which is staged financing. And I wanted to talk about one particular aspect of that, which I have seen. It was actually the very first company I ever represented in the venture angel area many years ago, and they had an investor that was cash flowing their business. Now, what did that mean? That meant that at the end of every month or quarter, the investor would determine how much money they spent or what they needed, and he'd put it in. And what I saw was an example to me of something that I tried to make sure my clients would never do in the future. I think cash flowing your business with an investor like that is a recipe for disaster because you never have enough resources to really build the company. You're literally going from paycheck to paycheck, from week to week. So for those of you who haven't been down this road before and you get offered an opportunity from someone who says, you know what, I'll cover your cash flow and you'll give me half your business, I think you'd be better off taking a job. So,
All right.
We could talk more about that, but it's just something I see on occasion, and I think it's worth a warning.
To follow up on that, I was involved in a deal where we did something like that, and it ended up the investor, strategic partner investor, ended up having the last say as to how much money they would put into the pot. And that ended up crippling it, and there are all sorts of, what are the motivations on both sides?
Exactly. I just think it's something I would rather not be an entrepreneur than do a deal like that.
Valuation? Frode, do you want to take this, or are we going to?
Yeah. Let me start off, and we'll back and forth it a little bit. I think the most interesting thing about preparing this deck with Paul, and Jerry and I were being devil's advocate and going back and forth, is when we got to the valuation section where we are now. And my thinking was there's probably no question, no issue of more interest to an entrepreneur in tonight's session than what's my company worth, and if I take outside money, how much of my company am I going to have to give up? Because every one of us would like to think our company is worth 100 million or more, or $1 billion, or it's Facebook, and so therefore to raise a paltry million or two, I should give up a tiny slice of my equity and retain control and the total board and everything. And the truth is that valuations are very difficult. In more advanced businesses than a startup, you have metrics. You've got revenue, you've got markets and market share, you might even have some sales and some margins, and you can begin to do what valuation experts do all the time, which is create a valuation model for a business. But early stage, it's very hard to do. Now, a lot of venture capitalists and some angels will come to an entrepreneur and say, well, I know what your business is worth. I mean, I've looked at at your product or your idea, and I have a sense of what it could be worth in the marketplace. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you $2 million, but I want 50% of your business. Well, how did he get to that number? And what I'd like to do is, are we on the next slide, Paul?
Well, okay.
Should we stay on this for a sec before we go to the next slide? Or?
Yep.
So a simple way of looking at valuation is what is the pre-money value and what is the amount of the investment that equals the post-money value. And if I put in $1 million, I get that percent of the post-money value. So if a company's worth $2 million at startup and I put in $2 million on the pre-money valuation, the post-money valuation is $4 million, I get 50% of the company. But who is to say that the pre-money valuation is $2 million? That is a very difficult calculation. So Paul has listed some of the items here that venture capitalists look at to determine valuation. And it's undoubtedly the case that the more good answers you have to questions regarding market opportunity, management, products and solutions, and progress, the better answers you give, the less risk the venture capitalist perceives. Well, the less risk there is, think about it, the more value there is in the idea. I mean, risk is essentially a subtraction from the value of the commercialization of the value of an idea. If it's 75% unlikely that an idea gets to market, that's a lot of risk, and the valuation comes down big time. If it's only 25% or 10% unlikely that an idea gets to market, because you just have to prove that your prototype works and can be manufactured for a price that generates a margin that generates a profit, well, then your valuation is that much higher, and you have to give up that much less of your equity to take the money. I think that covers the first slide. So I wanted to go to the second slide. I want to give you my contribution this evening. I want to give you another way of looking at valuation, which I think is really the way a lot of VCs look at early stage valuation. It's not so much a question of what your idea is worth. It's a question of how much the VC needs to make on your idea to make his investment or her investment worthwhile. And the VC backs into a valuation. So there are a lot of words up there, but the simple way of looking at it is a VC looking at an early stage opportunity has an internal benchmark. His fund has promised X returns to investors, and he knows that he has to get like 10X on his best investments in order to generate the return that the fund has promised. Well, 10X is a big number. 10X is a home run. So how does he get to 10X? Well, he gets to 10X by valuing the company, by valuing his investment, and let's say in this example it's $2 million, he knows that he's got to get 20 out. He also knows that there's going to be dilution coming down the road. He knows there's going to be another several rounds. The chart that Paul showed you with the circles, there are going to be many rounds, many more dollars coming in. So he says to himself, well, okay, I come in at maybe 40%. I know I'm getting diluted to 20%, but if I have 20% of a company that exits at 100 or 200, if I've put in $2 million and I have 20% of a company that exits at 100, I get $20 million, I've made 10 times. Magic. I've backed into the valuation. I'll give you $2 million, but I've got to have 40% of your company to make my valuation work. Okay, what is $2 million divided by 40%? It's $5 million. the VC has valued your company not based on its intrinsic merit. He's valued your company at what it has to generate for him to get his 10x return. Now, I'm not saying every VC looks at early stage investments this way. I think a lot of VCs are driven by their own return requirements. And in an early stage investment, before you have revenues and profits and margins, it makes a lot of sense for the VC to look at return in terms of what's fair to him. Then Paul will say, well, okay, but if that's not a fair deal, you got to go out and find another investor who'll give you a better deal. And the beauty of it is there are lots of different ways of looking at this world. In my example, the VC has determined that he's looked at the technology, the product, the marketplace, and said, you know, I think this technology could ultimately, this company could ultimately be sold for $100 million. Well, if you're talking to Mark Zuckerberg and the discussion is sort of like headed to 50 billion, I'm just picking a wild example, it makes an easier discussion for the VC. He can see his 10 times more easily. But if the number is 100 million or less, the 10 times isn't there, and you may find the VC losing interest.
Yeah, and I think in closing this, to close this topic, no question that it's the metrics are very uncertain at the early stage, and there are a lot of different ways that VCs go about looking at this. The last bullet is important, as Frode mentioned. Your best valuation comes through having more than one offer, and that's how you're really going to. When a VC sees his or her deal slipping away, that's when they'll get religion and see if it's maybe they weren't quite right on the valuation. Anyway, okay, now we're going to walk very quickly through the types of securities involved in doing an early stage financing. Sometimes, rarely, a financing round will be done with common stock. More often, it's going to be convertible notes or convertible preferred stock. Again, what we're talking about here is working with a C Corp. See the first session for more of a discussion about C Corps and LLCs, pros and cons. We decided it was probably useful to very quickly talk about equity and debt, just at a conceptual level. Common stock is an ownership interest in the company. That's what the founders have. So when you start a company, you have common stock. That gives you a right to the profits of the company. It gives you a right in the rights in the management through your voting rights. When the company is liquidated, if you have common stock, you will receive payment following the payment of all the debt of the company. Okay, so that's sort of the most basic form of equity, is the common stock. To be differentiated from debt, which is a loan, which involves repayment of the principal plus interest. Now, upon liquidation, the debt holders get paid off before the equity holders, but they have no rights to share in the profits and no interest in the management of the company. So on the one hand, the common stock gets paid off after the debt gets paid off. So the debt gets paid off first. On the other hand, if you're a debt holder, all that you have a right to get paid is the amount of the loan, as opposed to the equity holder who takes whatever's left. So that's distinguishing very quickly between equity and debt. It becomes important when you look at the instruments that are used by investors, because a convertible note is debt that's convertible into equity. So it's debt that has some features of equity, whereas convertible preferred stock is equity that has certain features of debt. So a convertible note is a note that in certain situations can be converted into equity, and so you get the benefit of being treated like equity. Convertible preferred stock is equity that gets paid off before common stock. So you have common stock, then you have preferred stock, and then you have debt. So the debt gets paid off upon a liquidation first, then the preferred debt gets paid off, then the common stock. So it's just conceptually understanding how these different instruments work and the relationship between debt and equity. Here we outline quickly the three types of instruments. On the left, we have common stock. That's what founders get. Employees get common stock through stock options. Generally, board members and advisors will also get common stock, whereas external investors will get either preferred stock or convertible debt. Very rarely will you see external investors getting common stock, although it does happen. Okay, so common stock, basic undifferentiated equity interest in the company. That's what's held by founders. We're treating common stock here in those rare instances where it's used as an investment interest, investment instrument. When you use common stock as an investment instrument, you have a number of problems that come up. First of all, from the investor's perspective, it offers no downside protection. You have no rights beyond founders. In the event of a liquidation, you're paid out at the same rate as founders. You don't get paid off first. So it's not a very good deal for investors. On the other end, for the founders, they get maximum return and maximum control. So there are advantages for a founder if you end up doing an investment round with common stock. One problem that you have with common stock from the company side is that it complicates your employee options, because you like to give employees options in low-priced common stock. But if you do an investment round with common stock, you've set a value on the common stock, which creates a problem if you want to give employees low-priced stock options. Generally speaking, common stock is less expensive to issue than convertible notes and convertible preferred stock, although that depends on whether there are other contracts involved. Sometimes it will get used for a friends and family round, but again, no VCs and few sophisticated angels will do an investment round into common stock. Rather, you're going to be talking about convertible notes or convertible preferred. A convertible note is, as we discussed, it's a debt that will convert into equity upon certain circumstances. Generally speaking, a convertible note will convert into the security sold in the next round of financing that is of at least a specified minimum size, or what we call a qualified financing. And that will be at a discount to next round financing. So if you do a round of notes at $500,000, the deal will be, for example, at the next round of preferred financing that is at least of $1 million, the $500,000 of convertible notes will convert into the instrument in that financing, the Series A preferred, we'll call it, at a discount to the price per share paid by the investor, the Series A investor. So if that Series A investor is investing at $1 a share, your $500,000 of debt will convert into the Series A preferred at 80 cents a share. So that's giving you better pricing than the preferred investor is getting. And the reason for that is, since you invested earlier than the preferred investor, that's giving you a benefit. You're getting a benefit for having taken the risk of having invested early. Okay? So benefits are, it avoids negotiations over valuation and right, although there are issues that come up if there's a cap involved. One problem that comes up if there is a delay in closing the next round, if the next round comes after 3 years instead of 6 months, and the value of the company is now $20 million instead of $5 million, the value can be a lot higher than the investor had expected. So they may not be getting the benefit of their bargain. That is mitigated, as I referenced above, through use of a cap. So the investor may say, well, I will invest at a 20% discount to the next round pricing, but if that next round goes above $7 million, let's say, the value at which I convert is capped at $7 million. So if it's 10, if it's 15, if it's 20, doesn't matter, I'm capped at 7. So that's a way that has been used over recent years to give the investors the benefit of their bargain of having invested early. A issue that comes up is next round investors can, or as we were discussing, we could perhaps say will, try to renegotiate the terms of the convertible debt. So the Series A investors may say, well, I know you have those convertible note holders, and they think they're getting the same instrument as me, and they're getting it at a 20% discount, but we're not doing that deal. If you want my money, then these people have to convert to common, or they have to give up their 20% discount, or they have to take a different instrument, or whatever it is, which leads to a difficult discussion between you and your convertible note holders. Because the convertible note holders have a contractual right. They can't, you can't force them to give up their rights. But if the only way you're getting in that $1 million is if they give up their rights, then there's a difficult moment there. Convertible notes are faster and less expensive to negotiate and close than preferred, but they are more complex than common. They pay interest, they can be secured, and if they're not converted, they must be repaid ahead of equity, and they can be issued in multiple series.
I would say two things about this. Number one, starting about 3 years ago, give or take, we started to see every early stage deal being done using convertible notes. As someone who tends to represent companies and entrepreneurs more than investors, frankly, I never really fully understood why investors seem so anxious to do it, but they did. So we have a lot of companies out there. We have in our practice companies that we represent that have convertible note rounds out there that have been out there now. Some of them have reached maturity. They're close to reaching maturity. The qualified financing hasn't occurred. It's not clear whether the qualified financing will occur. Some of those rounds had automatic conversion features, but many of them did not. And so we're beginning to see a lot of interesting developments as a result of that, some of which are just completely unpredictable. The normal thing you'd expect is, the note holders decide they haven't been paid, they want to get paid, so they take whatever steps they need to liquidate the company and realize on the assets and get their money back. A lot easier said than done. The second instance is that many of these companies have seen their business models evolve and change. As a VC said to me very early in my life as an entrepreneur's attorney, that the worst thing that an entrepreneur can do is meet their 5-year business plan because it means they haven't changed it. Well, the truth of the matter is that it's very rare for a company to get started with an idea on day one and in 5 years later have delivered that idea to a business that it anticipated. It always changes. Sometimes it changes more than others. Sometimes the business that they started with, it doesn't work, but there are other assets that come out of it. It's such a short period, it's happened over such a short period of time that we're really, at least from my perspective, just beginning to see what some of the consequences of that are. And it's concerning a lot of people, so much so that some of our colleagues, lawyers, are beginning to talk about whether we shouldn't rethink the idea of a convertible note and maybe create some other type of instrument that doesn't have the same consequences. But I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years as some of these companies go through some unpredictable events as a result of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. A lot of convertible notes have a 18-month or 2-year maturity, and if a company can't get to the next round, it has to pay back the note. And there's never any funds to pay back the note. If you go back to my example of a VC who backed into a 40% interest in the company for $2 million, you can see the attractiveness of the convertible note, though. The flip side, which I'm sure Jerry acknowledges, it's a wonderful device, because if you don't want to be backed into that, if you don't want to be backed into giving up 40% of your company to an investor for $2 million, you do a $2 million convertible note, and but for the cap that Paul alluded to, but for the cap, you don't have to worry about the valuation until the next round. And in the next round, presumably there's more validation to the valuation, and maybe it's $10 million, in which case you've only given up a fraction of ownership and not 40%. So again, another interesting and difficult area.
Yeah, there's a lot of attractiveness to the convertible note structure. And I think, I mean, when you're doing a couple $100,000, it can make a lot of sense. And you'll see all the more when we go to the next slide, which is the alternative. Because, you know, as lawyers, we can bang out a set of convertible note documents pretty quick and easy compared to negotiating around a convertible preferred. So we got, I think, 3 more slides to go through here. So that's convertible notes. The alternative is convertible preferred. This is how deals, larger dollar deals for sure get done. This has sort of been the traditional way that VC deals have gotten done. But again, you know, until recently when we saw more convertible notes, at least at smaller round sizes. Convertible preferred, that is the equities that has the features of debt. So it gives investors downside protection for reasons we'll explain. It can increase the returns for the investors. It has protective provisions, which gives veto rights over exits, financings. So if the investor will have some ability to have some control over the company, unlike a convertible note. In a convertible note, they're just a debt holder. They don't have equity, they don't have voting rights. Until they convert, they've got nothing. It solves the problem we discussed before because you can give the attractive low-price stock options to your employees on common stock. Convertible preferred stock strengthens your balance sheet compared to debt. You know, a convertible note is a note, so it's putting debt on your balance sheet, which creates issues. We do them in Series A, Series B. Another advantage of convertible preferred stock as compared to convertible notes is that it gets around the renegotiation problem. If you have done your first round as a simple round of convertible preferred, it is less likely that the next round of investors are going to try to beat down the rights of the first round investors. Convertible note holders, it can be difficult to preserve their rights. A first round of preferred, that will tend to be, it's more likely to be respected by the next round of preferred. But convertible preferred is more complex and expensive to use, although there are form agreements out there that simplify that somewhat. But bottom line is a convertible note deal, again, as we said, you can bang it out pretty quickly. A convertible preferred stock deal, there are a lot of issues, you know, to be negotiated, such as things on this page. I mean, these are the highlights of negotiating a convertible preferred deal. First of all, there's a liquidation and dividend preference. Convertible preferred stock, one of the benefits of it is that it gets paid out before common stock. So upon a liquidation, whether it's, you know, things don't go well and you're selling for a couple $1,000,000, or things go great and you're selling for $200 million, the convertible preferred holders get paid first. So if you sell the company for $2 million and the convertible preferred holders put in $3 million, they're taking everything before the common holders get a dime. So that's, you know, an important thing to take on board. And that's the benefit of convertible preferred stock. That's why the investors like it. It also can have a multiple. So it may not just be that they get paid first, but they may get paid two times their money, 3 times their money. I mean, in this market, generally we're seeing only 1 times liquidation preference, but in bad times we've certainly seen higher liquidation preferences, where convertible preferred investors get a multiple of their money back first. So that can be pretty severe if you're a founder. And they can have dividends as well that come. So not only are they getting their money back, but they've got an 8% dividend as well. Option pool, another issue that needs to be negotiated in a convertible preferred. Is there going to be an option pool set aside for your employees? How much? Does it come out before or after the investment round? That is to say, does it dilute the founders, or does it dilute the founders and the investors together? Mandatory redemption. Very often around a convertible preferred, we'll have a provision that will say, after 5 years, if you haven't had an exit, you have to buy back, you company have to buy back my stock. Well, surprise, if you haven't had an exit, there's no money back, there's no money out there to buy back their stock. And then things get tough, because what will usually happen is they'll have a right that over 3 years you have to buy back their stock at 1/3 a year, the amount that they paid in, and if you can't afford to do it, then they take over the board. That's a standard remedy. So basically that's the moment where you start to lose control of the company. And this goes back to something we discussed in the beginning, the need that the investors have to get an exit within 5 to 7 years. If you don't give them an exit and they've got convertible preferred stock, they'll use that as a hammer to beat you down and to take over control of the company. Anti-dilution. That's the right whereby if things don't go well for the company and you have to do a future round of financing at a lower valuation than your first round of investors invested in, they will have rights that will give them an increased amount of stock than they originally had. And that'll come out of your hide as the founder. So that can be a very onerous provision. Protective provisions, these are veto rights. In a convertible preferred round, the investors will have a veto over a sale of the company, maybe future financings, debt, any number of important provisions in terms of how you operate the company, the investors will have a veto over. Board composition. The convertible preferred investors will likely have a board seat, and they may have certain veto rights on the board as well. And just by virtue of having the board seat, that gives them a lot of say over the company. And then there will be reverse vesting. That is to say, you as a founder, you thought you owned 100% of your company. Well, surprise, you're going to vest into your position, and if you leave after 2 years, you're going to have to give back half of your stock. So that can be a pretty severe provision as well, but investors will likely insist on it. Anything to add before we go to securities laws? Okay.
Not if you don't want to state your own mind.
All right. And then lastly, we're going to talk about securities laws very quickly. Here we just really want to call it out for you. Whenever you are issuing securities, you have to make sure you're complying with the securities laws. If you are not selling pursuant to a registration statement, that is to say a registered offering, or an exemption, then you are issuing your securities illegally. So it's very important for everyone to keep in mind. And it doesn't matter how it is. If it's going to an investor, if it's going to a family member, if it's going to your buddy that's giving you $10,000 to help start your company, your landlord, any situation where you are issuing equity or promising to issue equity, that's a situation covered by the securities laws. It's very important to get that right. That's the moment when you need to talk to your lawyer. Because if you're not working with a lawyer, likely you're going to get it wrong. And when you have violated the securities laws, it is difficult and possibly and potentially impossible to clean up a violation of the securities laws once it's occurred. The good news is that complying with the securities laws is generally not difficult, as long as you do it timely and you know what you're doing. Okay? We will leave you with the Jobs Act, which we referenced in the beginning. As many people are aware, this law was passed earlier this year. It's going to provide opportunities for crowdfunding going forward, which I think a lot of people are excited about, an ability to raise up to $1 million a year through small investments from numerous people with easier compliance with securities laws than we had in the past. So it is not effective yet, but it will become effective hopefully over the next months and year. And I think it'll present a lot of opportunities that have not been available to entrepreneurs before. Another important aspect of the Jobs Act that we should reference is that up until now there's been a ban on general solicitation. That is to say, you have not been able to advertise your offering of securities. That's something that's changing in the law going forward, as long as the sales are only made to accredited investors. As we said, these issues of securities laws are all things that we will be discussing in a subsequent session where we really take a deep dive on structuring a financing and securities laws compliance. But we at least wanted to touch on these issues today so you're all aware of them. With that, although we're a little bit over in time, we can go to some quick Q&A. So.
To be considered a funding portal, do you need to be FINRA registered? What constitutes a funding portal?
Well, we don't have the regs out yet, but presumably that's going to, yes, that there's going to be a registration process involved in being a funding portal.
Always traditionally had to file for a Reg P for 506, but some lawyers on the West Coast have been some opinions that now you no longer have to do that, and you're still in compliance. If you're a company, startup, you're trying to stay completely under stealthy so that you can't be found on the EDGAR. Any thoughts on that?
On doing a 506 offering and not filing a Form D?
Not filing the Reg, yeah, not filing the Reg D. It's been like, the last 12 months has been, it started, firms where you want to stay stealthy. And there's a difference of opinions on this.
There's no terrible penalty for failing to file it.
Yeah, I think yeah. There's never been a penalty to speak of for failing to file a Form D. It is technically required by Reg D. I mean, we're talking about a particular rule under the securities laws, which goes beyond what we're this session with Rule 506, which is the rule that securities lawyers generally use for early stage financings. There's a requirement under that law that you file what is a very simple form, Form D, with the SEC. The point is that there's never been a penalty for failing to file a Form D, even though you're required to file it. It didn't used to make much of a difference, but now with EDGAR filing, it becomes a way you're presenting a lot more information about yourself that's easily searchable. So, I mean, I don't think the things are any different than they used to be. There is no penalty, but it's still required to be done. So.
But was the question, I couldn't hear the whole question, is it that some lawyers in California are suggesting that you don't have to file a Form D?
Well, there have been a couple of opinions, I mean, I'm not a legal guy, but there have been a couple of opinions that there's no need to file the Form D, or you can hold off on filing. I haven't read it, but I know if you stealth companies want to stay off the radar entirely, you're doing a deal, early stage.
Well, I'll just offer a view that 506 is a safe harbor, and if you comply with all the requirements of 506, including filing the Form D, you are deemed to not have offered a security in violation of the securities laws. There is also an exemption under so-called Section 4.2, which doesn't have any safe harbor. It has to be an offering not to the public that's not involving a distribution. And I think some subcategories of lawyers have been comfortable issuing 4.2 opinions all along, and that may be what you're seeing in
specifically Form D, as opposed to the other exemption. Yeah.
Well, let me jump in with one other point. I think one issue that you have that comes up then is the state filings, because you have state filings that are required. They're minimal under a Reg a 506 offering, but those state filings do require a Form D be filed. So I think you get into a tricky area as to whether you're in compliance at a state level. And I would say, generally speaking, you don't need to be so concerned about, I mean, you don't want to, you want to be in compliance with the SEC law, with SEC regs, but the people that are most likely to come after you are the state regulators. And they can come after you with a vengeance. So.
They can, but they typically come after you when an investor complains, and the investors in these companies are rarely going to complain that the company they invested in did something bad.
Yes.
That's the reality.
Yeah, but when the day comes when they do complain and the state regulator goes after you, then the fact that you failed to file a Form D, and if estate filing may come back to haunt you. So.
Well, you can always claim for it too, because it's not exclusive.
Yes, at that point, yeah, for sure you're claiming for it too, because that's all you got left at that point. But that's not necessarily the position you want to be in. But anyway, enough on an issue which is actually outside of this.
Well, all I
topic.
can say is you should have the idea that needs to be kept stealth like that, because then you've got a great idea.
I just want to piggyback on something you guys are saying. It's not worth the headache. You know, file the reg deeds, takes 10 minutes, send the state the compliance. It's like, depending on the state, it's a couple $100, but you know, it's not worth the headache. Just do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, if you have I mean, we're talking about someone who wants to stay under the radar screen. Okay, that gives you a reason not to do it. But generally speaking, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, a Form D, you know, is easy to do. The state filings are quite straightforward. You know, I mean, my advice to my clients is do it. I mean, why wouldn't you do it? Because why put yourself at a risk of being not in compliance? So I think that's right.
Paul, on your slide on the angels, one of the last slides at the bottom, it says, "How do you find angels?"
Yeah.
And you didn't say anything about that, did you?
Did we skip over that? Okay. Well, whatever. I'll take your word for it. How do you locate angels? Yes, we didn't talk about that. Some easily and some with difficulty, I would say. So you know, there are angel groups out there that are like New York Angels and Jumpstart that are very visible and easy to find. There are angels. If people are familiar with Angel List, a web service that's out there. That's another way to locate angels. There are some that are easy to locate, but I have a lot of angels that I know just because they happen to be my clients, and I know they're looking for fun. I know what type of companies they're looking for, and they tell me what sort of opportunities they're looking for, and from time to time I can make an introduction between a client who is an angel and a company. But it would be very difficult for that company to find that angel if it weren't through some sort of referral. So I think, I mean, the answer is, again, some are relatively easy to find. Others, it's just incidental in terms of who you know and how you make the connection. I don't know, Frode or Jerry, if you'd like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the ones that are easy to find, ask around. I think is the way to find angels. You know, there are. That's when it comes down to networking. You know, who you talk to. Going to investment events and the like. So.
But it needs to be it really needs to be a face-to-face kind of thing. You know, this idea of sending inquiries off and email or mail or any other way, any other indirect way, really doesn't work. You've really got to go out there. I tell my clients, go to events. I tell them about the events that I can tell them about, and I tell them to go. I said, and talk to everybody you can, and if you meet somebody and they tell you that they're an investor, talk to them. I mean, that's really the only way to do it.
What is the typical investment structure for a friends and family investor? We're talking maybe 100,000, 150,000 or less.
I'd say it can go a couple of ways. Sometimes it'll simply be it'll be common. Sometimes it can be a convertible note. I think those are probably the two most typical ways of doing it. Common, we talked about the disadvantages of doing a common. $100,000. For that, you might want to do a convertible note. It's not going to cost you that much, and it gives you advantages in the future. I should also say, talking about investment structures, we talked about the fact that a convertible preferred round is more expensive to do. even that area is changing. You know, there have been developments in the world of convertible preferred financing also. There's, you know, the Founders Fund and the Series C documents. There are 3 or 4 different sets of form convertible preferred documents out there other than the NVCA, the National Venture Capital Association forms, which are simplified forms for doing convertible preferred deals. You know, they can be a way to do a convertible preferred deal faster and cheaper than the way we've done them in the past with the NVCA forms, but you really have to be focused on not a lot of negotiation and sticking to the form, because once you start monkeying around with the term sheet and making changes, then that drives up the costs. But I mean, I've strayed from your point, but yeah, I'd say it's either going to be common or a convertible note. Do you guys?
Yeah, well, what I would say is I never do common, because I always want to keep the value, you know, for incentive purposes. So what we've tend to be doing is either convertible notes, or one of the things we have done over the last few years is we've developed a set of very simple preferred series, you know, A-1 basically preferred, that has simply a preference on liquidation and conversion to common and no other rights. So it's basically giving the investors the same rights that they would have if they were a convertible note holder or a common stockholder, but gives them a preferred instrument which helps when you're dealing with valuations for incentive comp plan purposes.
Do you have trouble at such an early stage setting a valuation? I would think that would be the biggest problem. You have friends and family, early stage, 100,000. Is that 10%, 50%,
They
1%?
just agree on a number, and you know, I mean, you can fuss and fuss over valuation. When you're raising a small amount of money, it isn't as big a deal. And if they're your friends and family, they tend to fight less. The friends and family tend to take what you say more. You tend to be less greedy with them. So we've been able to do them. I mean, they, without much trouble, except that everybody wants to do a convertible note today. So that's what we're doing.
The convertible note just solves the whole question of valuation. You just don't even have to discuss it. So.
It doesn't. I mean, the cap issue puts the valuation front and center again. So nothing's perfect.
I wouldn't rule out straight debt in a very early, very, very early situation where a friend, where an uncle is willing to lend $20,000 and talk about the conversion some other day. I wouldn't rule that out. They're very early friends and family.
Yeah, I think I would add one thing. I mean, on the point of common, Jerry's right. If you ask me how does it get done, these often get done by common. But if you ask me how should it be done, I would agree with Jerry. Common is not the way to do it. But as a practical matter, I've had clients have come in and, you know, they've brought in some money and it's been done before I got there, and it was common. And Jerry's right. At that point, you've created a valuation problem in terms of.
Well, because they might be more like co-founders at that stage than friends and family. They might be two people agreeing, one agreeing to provide funds, another with an idea, but they want a co-venture. They want to be partners, if you will. And that leads to common, right?
Yes, and yeah, potentially leads to valuation issues, but yeah.
I understand that in order to be an investor, an angel investor, one has to be an accredited investor, right, in the U.S.
Well, you don't have to be, but you probably should be, because if you aren't an accredited investor, then it complicates the securities filings for the company. I mean, let's put it this way: for the companies that I represent, if they come to me and say we want to take money from an unaccredited investor, I tell them that's going to complicate your financing situation. And so generally speaking, angel investors are accredited investors. I mean, do you guys want to?
Yeah, actually my question was, we're thinking about bringing money from foreign investors. Would that be like a limitation for us? Like in terms of them not being like
Non-US based investors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, if they're non-US based investors, then they're not subject to the US securities laws. So they don't have to be accredited investors. What?
Even if the company's in the US.
Yeah, even if the company's here.
So that wouldn't be a problem.
No, no problem.
Okay. Thanks.
But you need to make sure there's compliance with the laws in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I would still consult a lawyer, because you may have jurisdictional means and you may have a person who the transaction may take place in the US, and there's Reg S, and there are a whole lot of other things to think about.
Yeah, I think that Frode makes a good point. If it is in fact truly, it fits within Reg S, then you're okay. But you need to make sure that it does, because there are specific requirements that need to be you need to be complied with to make sure that you're okay.
Hi. So back to the crowdfunding for 1 second. If I remember the slide, it said it was like $1 million was the cap probably, and it would be done through some kind of a portal theoretically, and the investors would have to be accredited investors. How do you have accredited? It said accredited in the crowdfunding slide.
The Jobs slide.
The Jobs Act, right?
You know, the whole issue of accredited investors and the job thing is a major mess, because the SEC regs have now created multiple classes of accredited investors, and how one determines whether one is an accredited investor. So it's very, from my perspective, it's very unclear how this thing is all going to sort itself out.
And another answer is, I think what you're referring to, I think the Jobs Act eliminates the solicitation problem for accredited investors. So you can solicit anybody who's accredited investor. I don't think it said that you can do $1 million of crowdfunding with all accredited investors. I don't think those regs are out yet.
Okay,
Yeah, the slides, we've got the slide up. Yeah, the accredited investor issue comes up with respect to general solicitation, as Frode says. Crowdfunding is a way of not having to deal with the accredited investor issue. It's
the Kickstarter, Indiegogo world.
But the problem there, just my 2 cents, is there is yet to be a Kickstarter for real equity, right? So nobody is yet buying real equity, like mini shares of common stock, on a crowdfunding model.
No, but this is potentially could lead to that.
Well, this is what these regs are supposed to cover, but we have 100 years of total paranoia about selling securities to widows and orphans and people who aren't accredited. Now we're going to wipe it out with the internet, so we'll see what the SEC comes up with.
We have a lot of artists in the music business doing a lot of projects in crowdfunding, and
right, but they're not selling equity.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I think crowdfunding works great for charity. It works great for artists. It works great for. It could even work. It probably will work great for startups, but you're not necessarily going to get equity for it. You might get product.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know exactly what it's going to look like until the regs are out. I think as securities lawyers, we have a little bit of concern. We hope that it works and it works great. We do have some concern, as Frode said, because at one level it looks like sort of the boiler room Full Employment Act. It's just going to make it a whole lot easier to go out and solicit those widows and orphans, and it's a concern. Hopefully it doesn't come to pass, but if you ask the SEC regulators tell you a huge amount of their enforcement action comes in Reg D, which is the simplest form of, which is the loosest form of securities issuances now. That's the lion's share of the fraud that they see is in Reg D and these relatively easy 506 offerings. So now we're going to have an even simpler, more broad form of securities offering. I mean, one just has to be concerned that there's going to be fraud involved, and one doesn't want for that to taint the industry. I mean, I'd say that's my concern. You don't want there to start to be fraud around, the startup investing, and for it to give what you guys do a bad name, because it gets associated with all these hucksters. So.
Yeah, but I mean, historically, over the last 20 years, it does not seem to have been a huge problem. You don't see a lot of stories about it. You don't hear a lot of stories about it. I've been practicing in the space for 30 years. I've never had a client that's come close to being a fraud. I certainly wouldn't represent them if I knew that they were. I think that a lot of this I think there's an overreaction here, this widows and orphans thing, and Frank, personally, I think the SEC should pay more attention to the people on Wall Street. Those are the ones who are. Hope there's nobody here from Wall Street. But I hope we get through it, because I honestly believe it will be a real boon if we can help entrepreneurs raise money at this level and not be stuck. Where do I find an angel? How do I find a VC? I mean, it's crazy.
On the other side of the coin, guys, do you think VCs are going to suffer at all with the Jobs Act at all?
Well, bear in mind that the venture capital industry has shrunk dramatically over the last 5-6 years, and actually continues to when you look at the number of deals being done. And then at the lower end, the VCs can't function because the economics don't work. So what we're really talking about here is early stage funding. That will only help VCs if there are more companies that are able to build successful businesses based on that early stage funding. So I think a lot of them certainly feel that it can only help.
So we're way over time. We'll take 2 more questions.
How do you handle investment from new senior staff that you're bringing on? So you have a founder, and the founders put in money, but you have new people coming on board, and they actually want to invest. How is that covered?
You mean an employee, like you hire someone and they want to invest in the company that they're working for?
You wouldn't push them off to a Series A, because when you do a CDO or...
If it's a senior officer, they're an accredited investor. They can invest in the company if they want to.
What if they don't have $100,000 or $1 million?
Well, as a senior officer of the company, they meet the definition of an accredited investor without having to meet the other requirement. On the other hand, I always advise my clients, you don't want to sell equity to someone who can't afford to lose it. So you need to balance those two things. But I will say that over the years, I have had some clients who have had senior executives that have been brought in as hires who have offered to invest and have invested in the company. So it's doable.
Because
Can I ask a quick question? Why don't VCs sign NDAs?
I could take a shot at that, Paul. I mean, a VC will tell you that he's got 15 minutes to hear your idea, and if he uses it up reading an NDA, you're done.
Yeah, I think I would also say, on that point that that's true, but it's also, VCs are seeing so many opportunities, and if they're in a particular space, they're seeing many opportunities that look just a little different than yours. They don't want someone to come back. They don't want you to come back in 3 years and say, "Oh, you stole my idea and you're using it for this other company you invested in." It could be that someone else had the same idea or close enough to raise a question. So, all right. Well, I think with that, let's.
Well, I want to compliment the audience for having the fortitude to stick with us.
Thank you.